Welcome. Tonight, we travel back to Ming-Dynasty China, not to the palaces of emperors, nor to the banquets of scholars, but to the quieter, humbler world of ordinary people. Farmers, laborers, peddlers, and their families, men and women who lived not with abundance but with modest meals, gathered from fields, markets, and the rhythms of the seasons. Food, for them, was not simply nourishment. It was survival and it was memory. It was a bowl of rice after hours of labor, a handful of millet softened in boiling water, a few preserved vegetables that added taste to an otherwise plain meal. Let us move gently through this world, slowly, patiently, seeing what markets looked like, what foods were common, how meals were cooked, and what tastes filled the mouths of those who lived their days in quiet poverty under the Ming. To understand food in the Ming, we must first understand the lives of those who ate it. The dynasty lasted from 1368 to 1644, a vast empire stretching across mountains, rivers, and fertile plains. While emperors in Beijing dined with delicacies, roast duck, sweet pastries, fragrant teas, most people lived closer to the soil. The poor were farmers and villagers. Their wealth was measured in harvests, in baskets of grain, in jars of stored pickles and salted roots. For them, food was simple, repetitive, shaped by what they could grow and what little they could afford to buy. Meals were not feasts, but rhythms, quiet repetitions of the same staples, flavored by the seasons and softened by community. At the heart of their diet was grain. In the south, rice was the foundation. It grew in paddies, its green shoots bending under the weight of summer rains. For the poor, rice was rarely the polished white grains we picture today. It was often coarse, husked imperfectly with a heavier texture. In the north, wheat and millet took the place of rice. Steamed buns, flat cakes, and porridges filled bowls. Millet, especially, was hardy, yellow grains boiled into a thick gruel, eaten morning and evening. Barley and sorghum appeared as well, though often in years when better harvests failed. These grains were filling but rough. They left the body full but not satisfied. The staple grain was never just food. It was security. To have a full jar of millet or sacks of rice stored safely for winter meant safety. To run out was to live in fear of hunger. For those who had a few coins, the local market was a place of color and sound. Imagine a narrow street lined with stalls, baskets filled with greens, bundles of scallions, handfuls of beans, small piles of turnips, cabbages, and radishes, their roots still damp with earth. There were vendors selling tofu, soft and pale, cut into squares and floating in wooden tubs of water. Salted fish, dried until stiff, hung from strings. Spices, though limited for the poor, might be sold in small measures. A pinch of ginger, a clove of garlic, a fragment of cinnamon bark. The air carried the sound of bargaining, the clatter of wooden scales as goods were weighed, the faint aroma of frying oil from a street vendor's pan where someone might buy a simple cake or dumpling. For the poor, the market was not a place of luxury. It was a place to stretch coins as far as possible, a cabbage to last 3 days, a wedge of tofu for a family meal, enough to flavor the staple grains without emptying the purse. Inside humble homes, cooking was simple. Meals were made over clay stoves, fueled by bundles of wood or dried stalks of millet. Pots of iron or clay were set over the fire, steam rising slowly into the air. Rice was boiled into plain bowls. Millet was cooked into porridge, thick or thin depending on how much was available. Wheat flour was kneaded into simple flatbreads or stretched into rough noodles. Vegetables were chopped and simmered in broth. Tofu might be fried, but more often it was stewed with cabbage, seasoned with soy sauce if the family could afford it. Salt was a precious necessity, added carefully, never wasted. Meals were rarely elaborate. A grain, a vegetable, sometimes a scrap of fish or meat if fortune allowed. But even in this simplicity, there was warmth. The warmth of steam rising from bowls. The comfort of sharing what little there was around the same wooden table. So what did an ordinary day of eating look like? Morning often began with a thin porridge. Millet gruel, perhaps flavored only with salt, filling but plain. Children and elders ate the same, their bowls warming their hands in the cool of morning. At midday, if work allowed, rice or noodles were eaten, often accompanied by pickled vegetables preserved from earlier harvests. A small amount of oil might be used to stir-fry greens, but oil was precious and never wasted. Evening meals were the heartiest. A larger serving of grain, steamed buns, or rice, with vegetables and perhaps tofu. In rare moments, a small piece of salted fish or pork might be added, its flavor stretching across a pot of soup, shared by all. Though repetitive, these meals provided sustenance. And in repetition, there was rhythm, a kind of quiet comfort in knowing what would appear on the table each day. For the poor, food was always close to scarcity. A failed harvest meant hunger. A dry year or locusts or floodwaters could strip away what little security existed. In those times, the meals grew even plainer. Grains were stretched thin. Wild herbs, roots, and even tree bark sometimes filled bowls in place of food. To eat was to survive, and survival often meant eating less than the body wanted. Meals filled the stomach, but rarely with abundance. Hunger lingered at the edges of daily life, a quiet companion, rarely spoken of but always felt. And yet in the taste of scarcity there was resilience. Families learned to stretch flavors, to make cabbage broth last longer, to pickle vegetables for the months when fields lay empty. Though the poor could not afford lavish spices, taste still mattered. Garlic and ginger in small amounts brought warmth and sharpness to dishes. Spring onions were used fresh, their green stalks chopped finely to garnish bowls of noodles. Soy sauce, dark and salty, flavored stews and soups, though often used sparingly. Fermented pastes of beans or soy gave depth to simple dishes. Vinegar was sometimes added for tang. Chili peppers arrived only toward the late Ming period, and even then they spread slowly. Most meals were mild, simple in flavor, gentle in seasoning. But even a small note of garlic or ginger transformed plain porridge into something more comforting, more alive. There were times, however, when food became more than survival. Festivals brought rare moments of abundance. At New Year, families might prepare dumplings, stuffed with cabbage, garlic chives, or a little meat. Sticky rice cakes, sweetened with sugar or honey, were shared in celebration. At weddings or community gatherings, a pot might be filled with noodles, their length symbolizing long life. Families who rarely tasted meat might share a whole chicken or duck, each piece carefully divided among many hands. These occasions stood out in memory, not just for the food itself, but for the contrast they provided against the backdrop of daily plainness. These meals felt like true abundance. In the end, the food of the poor in Ming-Dynasty China was not defined by variety, but by rhythm. Grains formed the body of each meal. Vegetables gave color. A little oil, a little salt, a whisper of spice brought warmth. Scarcity was always close. Yet within this plainness there was endurance. To taste a bowl of millet porridge was to taste survival. To share pickled greens was to share resilience. To eat dumplings once a year was to taste joy. The story of food here is not of feasts, but of lives sustained in quiet repetition. Meals that carried families through seasons of work and rest, hardship and hope. As we leave the kitchens and markets of Ming China behind, we might carry something with us. A reminder of how deeply food is tied to life. How plain meals can hold memory, comfort, and resilience. For the poor of that time, food was not abundance. It was not luxury. It was a bowl of porridge in the morning, a handful of rice at night, the whisper of garlic, the crunch of cabbage, the warmth of steam rising into cool evening air. And in that simplicity there is something enduring, something human. May this quiet journey stay with you, and may you rest, as they once did, with gratitude for the meals that sustained them, one day at a time. Sleep well,